All right. Well, in that case, I will call this meeting to order, the Bloomington Commission on Sustainability. And this is our May regular meeting. Today is Tuesday, May 10th, 2022. We're at 6:01 p.m. We have neither a secretary nor a co-chair, so I'm going to call roll. And we'll start with Christy.
Here.
Thank you. Matt Austin.
Here.
Sarah Congress. Emma Ferguson.
Here. Sorry.
Matt Flaherty.
Here.
Alicia Hardy. Nolan Hendon. David Manier.
Present.
Is that pronounced correctly? Maynor, thank you. All right. And Sean Mia.
Here.
All right. Nigel Routsong. Absent. And Joseph Winia, I am here. We do have a quorum. And that will bring us to approval of the agenda, which I am going to share for everyone's reference. And manage the Zoom feed at the same time. Okay, thank you for your patience. So this agenda was distributed by email on Thursday the 5th. Are there any objections to adopting it as distributed? And I will quick add to the roll call, Alicia, you're here. All right, we are just adopting the agenda. Is there any objection to adopting it as distributed? No. All right, seeing none, it is adopted. And we do not have minutes from last month's meeting. So that will bring us right to agenda item number 4, public comment. If there are any members of the public present who would like to speak, you will have 3 minutes each. And I think if, Sean, you'd be willing to scooch a mic over so that...
He just sits in that.
Oh, there's one right there next to it. Okay.
Just that chair would be great.
Okay. Good here.
Last Sunday, the EC's Air Quality Working Group met with, I'm blanking out his name, the senior SPIA research person on air quality issues related to Bloomington, and seeking his advice for our plans to have members of the commission do periodic air testing with our portable sensor. So that was very helpful, and so that's basically the only thing I wanted to bring up.
All right, thank you. And I don't see any members of the public on Zoom, so that will be the end of our public comment. Next is a report from co-chairs. I have nothing to report. Nigel is absent, so.
Can you say hi to Sean?
Yes, actually, sorry, thank you. I'd also like to welcome our new member, Sean. If you'd like to take the opportunity to say anything, now would be an excellent time if you want to introduce yourself. If not, we can proceed.
Yeah, I can introduce myself.
Great.
I'm really happy to be here. I'm from Southern Indiana, born and raised. I've lived in Bloomington off and on since 2001. I currently work at IU and lab safety, and I'm a laser safety officer. I have been researching climate change and health for the past year. I just graduated from IU in December. I did an internship with the School of Informatics researching how the top 20 cities in the U.S. are mitigating and adapting extreme heat. And I'm currently enrolled in the Yale School of Public Health Climate Change and Health Certificate Program. I'll be completing that at the end of July. So I'm hoping to bring all of the things that I'm learning to the Commission on Sustainability. So my focus is extreme heat, and what I'm really hoping to bring to Bloomington is creating a heat health action plan. So that's something I would love to talk about at some point. So it's great to be here, and thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for being here. Just taking a note of those things.
Sorry, what was your name again?
Sean Mia.
Sean Mia. Nice to meet you.
I forgot to mention Bloomington Utilities for 5 years.
Uh-huh.
So I've worked for state and local governments.
Nice.
Thanks.
All right. That is the end of the report from co-chairs and brings us to item number 6, report from staff liaison. Lauren Clemens, if you would.
Sure, can you get the agenda on that?
Yes, I can.
Okay, just wanted to mention Community Voices for Health. This was something that I emailed. It's an ongoing community health improvement plan that is ongoing across Monroe County in updating public health efforts. There were a couple of community input sessions that were held in recent weeks. By next meeting, I'll have an update from the person that's leading that effort about what the findings were. I think that would be helpful in letting everyone know what's going on. Also, in addition, wanted to give an update. Last month was Earth Day. There were a variety of different public engagement efforts happening across the community. There was a green infrastructure tour, a couple of different tree plantings, and some informational social media videos. Those are also on a YouTube channel. If you go to the sustainability page, different environmental organizations submitted clips about what their organization does. And do I need to be near the microphone? You're fine. Okay. Including Solarize. There's a couple from City of Bloomington Utilities, Housing and Neighborhood Development. And so if you're interested in watching those retroactively, they're permanently on the website as well. I am also a member of the Monroe County Environmental Commission, and after the presentation on the climate engagement platform, talked to them about the same platform day after, and they're interested in doing sort of a cross-jurisdictional collaboration on that effort, so that if people are in city limits or in the county, they're becoming more engaged with this commission as well. So the meeting is always the day after this one, and if there's anything that you would like me to bring to the county, just please let me know about that. And then just in terms of program updates, there's some upcoming deadlines for nonprofit participation in the solar and energy efficiency loan program, and the Bloomington Green Home Improvement Program is ongoing. And then we are in the middle of the first cohort of restaurants in the Compost Up downtown program, so that's going pretty well as well. And then a little bit later, when we get to discussions, not resolutions, I will be giving a short presentation on the climate action plan, and then just an opportunity for you all to ask questions that you might have about that. So that's about it for me, unless you have questions about any of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you say it's going pretty well for the downtown restaurants, what is that?
Sure.
What
So
does that mean?
the goal was to get 4 participants, and we were actually able to sneak in a 5th. So in that first cohort, we actually included the convention center because they have quite a lot of waste generated.
Okay.
That's downtown, as well as a couple of other ones, including Nex, Osterirago, and Southern Stone, which was a little bit outside of the boundaries, but they were ready to start. And I guess actually there's more than, and farm. So all of them have started composting, and then we'll have some impact reports coming in for future months.
Okay, so composting the earth keepers,
Mhm.
picking their stuff
Yeah,
up. Sweet.
yeah. So the structure of the program is that restaurants sign up, and it's a 3-month free trial,
Right.
and then they decide whether they want to continue afterwards.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Lauren. Any other questions? All right. We can go ahead and go on to our report from Council ex officio, if you would, Matt.
Sure. Hey, everyone. There were a couple items listed in the agenda, and I'll touch on those first. First was Resolution 2209, which was a resolution to allocate the votes of the Bloomington City Council as part of the local income tax council, which is made up of Bloomington City Council, Monroe County Council, Ellettsville Town Council, and Steinsville Town Council. So collectively, those bodies all make up the local income tax council, and they pass resolutions to allocate their votes. This is a system set up by the state, and Resolution 2209 was looking at the city of Bloomington's share of that vote. So this is following a proposal for new revenue from Mayor Hamilton that came out a couple months ago, kind of building on discussions over the last couple of years, honestly, about the need for investments in the context of climate action in Bloomington, as well as other essential city services, public safety needs. So there was a discussion in 2020 that got tabled as the pandemic got underway. There was actually a vote in 2021 for some dedicated climate funding that failed. And then this proposal, which included kind of two components, two sets of general obligation bonds at about $5 million each to invest in infrastructure, so sustainable transportation infrastructure in particular. And that kind of grew out of the budget conversations last year, but then also this new revenue local income tax increment increase, which I think also came out of the budget cycle last year to some extent. And the final resolution of that was a reduced rate from what the mayor had initially proposed of a 0.69 percentage point increase in the local income tax rate, bringing us to 2.035% as the local income tax rate. This was under an economic development local income tax structure, which is pretty flexible funding. In fact, there's like a catch-all provision that money can literally be spent on any lawful purpose. But as part of that process, feedback the city council had given to the mayor over the last few years was that some folks were less comfortable with an increase that wasn't well specified or well articulated in terms of the need. So there was a pretty detailed proposal the mayor and his team had put together outlining the possible types of investments. The four broad categories were public safety, climate change preparedness and mitigation, equity and quality of life, and then essential city services. So there was a variety of things that fell into those different categories, even though some of those categories are sort of intersectional. But in the climate change preparedness and mitigation category, it was not at all clear, I would say, early in the conversations that section wasn't going to be gutted. So I'm happy to report that it was not. The ultimate increase will raise about another 14 point something million for the city of Bloomington in terms of annual revenue. To put that in context, our annual budget is a little over 100 million. And over a third of that, about 5.5 million, will go to transit and climate action plan implementation. So about 4 million or a little more than 4 million to augment and support some really transformational investments in Bloomington Transit, including establishing an east-west express line to connect across town, adding Sunday service, increases in frequency on routes, et cetera. And then about 1.6 million for climate action plan implementation, and that's could mean a lot of things. The climate action plan is pretty broad, of course. We just heard from Lauren about a number of the programs the city is running that we've used American Rescue Plan Act dollars to help launch. So we've got some really great things going with supporting energy efficiency investments and solar energy for low-income residents, for nonprofits, as well as downtown composting, et cetera. So a lot of this programmatic support where the private market might not otherwise be able to further action. This funding should help provide a mechanism to help us implement our climate action plan, which of course is the Commission on Sustainability's charge as well to help with implementation. So I think that's probably the major highlight for Bcos. Happy to answer questions about it after I wrap up updates here.
Can you speak a little bit to the process that's upcoming, just so that people are aware, like over the next 3 months, what will happen with budgeting? Because people may not be familiar with what that looks like.
Sure. So this money, under the economic development local income tax, it will all go into the city's general fund. But guide me if I'm off course from what you're thinking. But that will feed into this. This is done starting. It'll start for next year. The revenue impact. So we start the 2023 budgeting process pretty early. We'll have meetings in the next few months, kind of initially sharing some council member priorities. I think the mayor's department heads are already underway with their budget planning for 2023. Then we move to what we call Budget Week in late August. Late August. We have 4 nights in a row of budget presentations from all the city departments, get feedback and hear updates on progress from the previous year, budget goals. And then that moves to probably some negotiations back and forth between the city council members and the administration leading up to the actual budget ordinances themselves, which come in typically early October and have a state mandated passage, final passage date in early November. So that's kind of the timeline and process. This particular 14 million and change that's coming to be new revenue will be sort of, while it's going in the general fund, it will be, as part of the budget process, that will be accounted for and like described what the purposes are. So it's not just going into a fund that has no, I guess, accountability or follow through on what the kind of agreed potential allocations were. But we'll have a separate mechanism for tracking the investments, at least in the near term, of the new revenue on an annual cycle. And I guess for additional context on that front, all of these conversations about how much to allocate for what purpose, none of that is binding. It was all part of essentially the process and the public record to establish where the council and the mayor are of one mind on a compromise. But technically, the resolution itself that was passed to allocate the city council's vote share, all that specifies is the increment increase in the tax rate, nothing more. It's not possible to dedicate or otherwise encumber the funds directly through that process. But, you know, we did reach a sort of common understanding and resolution, so I have no doubt that in the first few years, absent a really emergent and compelling need, that the money will kind of follow the categories that we expect. Change circumstances and other things with programs or other investments, you know, can always change that, but that's the general understanding. If you want to get a sense of the final sort of agreement among council members, that went out in an amendment that was a packet addendum in last week's council meeting. So if you go to bloomington.in.gov/council and go to meetings and documents and scroll down to last week's meeting, May the 4th, you can find the labeling system isn't the best. It's like packet and then like packet with like a 1 after it. I think the one that says packet is probably the addendum. And if you download that, whichever one's only 4 pages long instead of the one that's 180 pages long, the one that's 4 pages long is the packet addendum, and there's an amendment there sponsored by myself, council members Piedmont Smith, and Sims, and there's a 2-page appendix that sort of outlines the agreed upon expenditures, which again were sort of a negotiated reduction from the mayor's initial proposal of a 0.855 percentage point increment increase. Final note, I guess, on the process is that you know, this is all set by state. I wish we could have progressive taxation of local income taxes. I wish we could approach things a little bit differently from a process perspective and vis-a-vis our relationships with county and other town councils. But the process is what it is. I think it's still, you know, much more in the community's interest to invest in addressing climate preparedness in a way that we wouldn't otherwise be able to. Same thing with transit. I think that's really important. You know, our city of Indianapolis is a good example. A few years back, passed a 0.25% increment increase in their local income tax to do a similar type of investment in transit, which has enabled the Red Line and now the Purple Line that they're developing. So bus rapid transit up in Indy. And you know, while some folks are obviously naturally inclined to oppose tax increases and/or sort of default to only the public safety policing sort of traditional core services of cities, again, I think this was the right approach. It had unanimous support from the city council ultimately, and while the county council wasn't weighing in directly at the same time, I had conversations with 6 of the 7 county council members, all of whom agreed there was a need for new revenue on their end as well, for Justice Center and similar programmatic reasons, although they were a little less suited at this point in time to articulate exactly what those costs will be, and maybe a little less inclined to engage in the weeds of that process with us. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, you know, there's, of course, the process wasn't without opposition, and there are some process limitations and other constraints that you know, undermine our ability to do exactly what we want to do with those types of things. Anything else you wanted me to touch base on?
I guess the only thing that I'll add is that every year annually there will be a separate sort of budgeting process for that fund. So it may change, like even if the allocation was for one set of things in this year, that amount may change in the next year depending on needs. I think you touched on that, but I think
Yeah.
if you're reading through the amendment, it may look like there's certain sort of programmatic allocations that are already decided that process will be winding through for the next 3 months. So I think there's an opportunity in the course of public meetings to become involved in weighing in if you'd like to, and keep you up to breast about what that meeting schedule looks like. But generally, the budget hearings are the last week of August this year. They would be, last year I think they were the third week, but it's gonna be the last week.
Mm-hmm. And I guess on those August hearings, that's really kind of a preview. That's not even accompanied by the ordinance itself that we'll ultimately vote on. It's more so the overview of each department's budget, and the actual voting occurs in October when we see the ordinances for the budget. And yeah, within those categories too, there's still a lot to be determined and flexibility. What types of climate action plan investments do we plan to make? There's no shortage of options for that. So if you have particular thoughts and interests about where that should go and what to advocate for, by all means, that'll be a good process. I wasn't even sure that was sort of pulled out separately for the budgeting process, or I knew it was going to be accounted for in some way.
I think it's happening parallel, but it's
Okay.
in a separate
Yeah.
fund, so.
Oh yeah, that's right. You created
yeah.
a dedicated fund.
It's a dedicated fund, and
So I take all that back about it going to the general fund. It goes to a separate fund.
yeah, there'll be an ED Lit fund,
Thank you.
and that just creates more sort of transparency for the public
you.
about expenditures related to that. So there's like 3 sort of parallel budget processing happening. There's a general fund that would happen every year. Each department has a budget. There's going to be American Rescue Plan funds for 2023, which is also happening. We've had an allocation this year. There will be an additional allocation for next year. Cities get up to 2 budget cycles to spend that, or is reverted back to the federal government. And then the third will be this, well, I guess there's 4 really, because there's the economic development lit, and then there's going to be the general obligation bonds, which were appropriated to certain uses. So there's going to be a lot happening. I think it's exciting. Just wanted opportunity for Matt to provide an update about that vote last week, because one of the actions in the climate action plan is to try to figure out a long-term funding source for addressing some of these needs that are going to be experienced by the community, not only next year or the year after, but really ensure that there's a way to make sure that this is cohesive and sustainable.
Yeah, so it's really significant to note that, so far some of the really cool programmatic things we've been able to do were with stimulus money, essentially, right? And I guess also worth noting that I know Councilmember Volin and a few others advocated strongly for this separate fund approach to kind of keep accountability and transparency related to that. And I guess if you want to look at details on the final allocations for the general obligation bonds as well, the packet addendum from the April 13th meeting is where we voted on those and settled the priority ordering of projects and what to invest in. It's really spread throughout the city, a lot to implement various recommendations from city plans, so the high priority bicycle network, key sidewalk gaps, other things like that, again kind of in that sustainable transportation space. I think there were a couple other things just to mention briefly. Constituent meetings, now a majority of city council members hold monthly constituent meetings, which is great. That was not exactly past practice in previous terms. So my own is Monday next week at 5:30 p.m. All of you are always, of course, welcome to join and bring up issues of concern. I'm looking at the council calendar. Councilmember Piedmont Smith's is 11 a.m. on Saturday. Looks like still via Zoom. Actually McCloskey here in this room. Maybe Zoom as well. Council members Rollo and Sandberg host a joint meeting. That's on Saturday the 21st this month. Sue Scambolari and Kate Rosenberger also host them. You can find all of these on the City Council's calendar. So if you go to the Council's webpage and scroll down on the right and click calendar, you can always find our broader calendar. And then I think the Climate Action and Resilience Committee was the final item to update. That's a council committee who's working on a number of things. I'm the chair. There's 3 other members: Councilmember Smith, Rollo, and Piedmont Smith. We met in late March for the first time this year of what is meant to be a quarterly cycle of meetings with Lauren to get some more in-depth updates and ability for Q&A and discussion around some of the programmatic things happening in ESD and with the climate plan than a city council meeting typically allows. When we have reports from the mayor's office at city council meetings. We usually have a pretty crowded agenda, and there's maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes for those updates. So this is allowing a little bit more collaboration and in-depth reports. My hope for the committee too is that it can be a way to organize and coordinate legislative initiatives that are under the cap or that might fall under the climate action category, even if they aren't specific actions in the cap. So it's a little bit early stages on some of those, but we did have a nice discussion in late March about options for prioritizing action this year. I know there's some ongoing conversations with Councilman Barallo, myself, others about the efforts to phase out gas blowers and other gas lawn equipment, two-stroke engines over time for their air quality, noise, pollution, and climate impacts. There's been a little bit of a discussion about updating some of the kind of city operations-oriented code we have, like so the Green Building Ordinance or energy efficiency benchmarking on the city operations sides of city buildings. And then finally, I know we've had a few conversations with Scott Robinson, head of planning and transportation department, about some unified development ordinance changes as well that are called for in the climate action plan, and looking at those maybe sometime in the fall. So again, kind of early stages on some of those things, but hopefully we can kind of coordinate them through that committee, and then I'd like to see them come to this commission to weigh in as well when relevant. It's not something that's always done with legislation, but I think it's good to tap our advisory commissions to weigh in and consider proposals. So yeah, more forthcoming on that. We don't have a second meeting of the year yet set, so Lauren and I were actually going to touch base after the meeting today about that. And I'll wrap up there, but happy to answer any questions. Sorry, it was a pretty long update.
No, that was good. No need to apologize. That's why you're here and we're here. Are there any questions from the report? I would like to ask one, just a point of verification of understanding. For the lit change that was just approved, is that a countywide increase?
It is, yeah.
So then the discussion that took place within the council was related to the allocations that would be received by the city?
Correct, yeah. There's a formula breakdown that's based on, there's actually different ways to approach it. We opted for a population-based approach, which to me is the most logical for an income tax, which is tied to people and populations, of course. So it's not actually directly tied to individuals and where the individuals live. Rather, it's like 58% of the population of Monroe County lives in the city of Bloomington. Therefore, we get 58% of the local income tax share. Okay. And similar to other units, Steinsville, Ellettsville, and Monroe County government.
Excellent.
Yeah. And again, there's no it's not possible to pass a city-only local income tax. It's just all organized at the county level, and this local income tax structure is all defined by state code.
So it was necessary that the other members of the county were interested in approving the tax as well?
So yeah, I don't think they've actually voted yet. They'll do that through a separate process. Whether or not they don't need to, as it turns out, because the city council, by population weight, has a majority share. Actually, I think 8 city council member votes are enough to pass a local income tax council increase, which is also part of the process challenges and constraints that folks like or don't like. I mean, you can criticize that. Again, it's a state-defined process. Giving the city council somehow less share would also be shortchanging the city in terms of, what if you've got a county where city population makes up 80% of the county? Would they too not have a... It's formulaic. It is what it is. It's not without its shortcomings. We did go through 3 sort of scoping processes over 3 years to settle on something that everybody could live with. And again, I think there was general support for an increase among county council as the other major, largest voting share unit, although less engagement on the details.
Thank you for that. All right, with no further questions on that report, that will bring us on to discussions, not resolutions. At this point, I would like to move that we add an agenda item preceding the first item to have Lauren's short presentation on the climate action plan.
Sure. Needs to go.
I'll move it if I may. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? All right.
Let me just
Let's do that.
send it to myself so I can share it.
Okay. If you want the climate action plan, I have it up.
It's quite a few pages. I'm not sure that we're going to page through it right now.
Would you like me to stop my share so you can
Sure, that'd be great.
take it?
So, in case anyone's wondering where, if you have, first of all, don't know where the climate action plan is, if you go to the Bloomington City website /sustainability under the reports section, there's a variety of different reports, including the climate action plan. All right, so most of you haven't been on the commission for very long, and I just wanted to provide sort of context as to sort of contextualize this conversation when people say, you know, this is a climate action plan action, well, you know, what context was that building out of, what was the background around that, and then any other questions that you might have about the plan itself. So back in 2018, the Bloomington Comprehensive Plan process wrapped up. That was a multi-year engagement process to update the City of Bloomington Comprehensive Plan. That sort of broadly set a vision for sustainability, but at that point, concurrently, there was a sustainability action planning process happening as well. That was the first strategic plan around sustainability to look at what gaps there were in the community around sustainability, to set priorities about what to address in different sectors. The focus of that plan primarily was on sort of city nonprofit collaboration to address a variety of different broad categories of sustainability. One of the actions in the Sustainability Action Plan was to do some follow-on planning more specific to climate. So at that point, it was time to do a greenhouse gas inventory, to look at our emission sources, and to look at some more planning efforts as to where Bloomington was going to experience climate vulnerabilities. So in 2019, following on into 2020, in order to keep up our commitments under climate mayors and our organizations that we belong to, we also completed these sorts of assessments. So that was really to just provide a greater understanding of where is the problem originating from, and in what capacity, and what are the impacts specific to our community, who's going to be the most impacted by climate, and which geographic areas, and what are the actual risk vulnerabilities. So those both you can find on the same site that I mentioned. Subsequently from that pandemic hit, I was actually completing the vulnerability assessment while that was happening, and so the planning process for the climate action plan had initiated in January of 2020. We had sent out a climate survey to the public. We had about 400 responses, and then everything sort of ground to a halt in March. I paused the planning effort for about 3 months, and then we restarted in June to get started again with planning. So concurrently, Recover Forward was built out of the pandemic to look at opportunities to build back better, to recover forward from the pandemic, and look at ways to have sort of a green pandemic recovery. So there's been a variety of different investments since 2020, and that has been funded through a combination of, you know, American Rescue Plan funds, reversion funds, as a way to sort of respond to emerging needs from the pandemic as well. So there's a couple of different progress reports as well that have been presented to City Council over time. There will be another one this year, working on scheduling that as well. So the City of Bloomington Climate Action Plan was accepted by Council last year in April. It really is fairly comprehensive at building on the greenhouse gas inventory and looking at targeting emissions reductions and becoming more resilient as a community. To speak to the sort of planning process, back in October of 2019, we were looking to figure out, like, how is Bloomington specifically contributing to climate change and in what ways, and that's where that greenhouse gas emissions report inventory, and that finding was that primarily our emissions come from building electricity use, transportation, and waste. That sort of emissions profile changes from community to community. We don't have a ton of heavy industry in Bloomington, so a lot of our built environment is what is contributing to emissions generation. At the same time, I was also looking at, what are the emissions trends over time, and we could see that we had reduced our per capita emissions through a combination of increased efficiency, sort of slight decarbonization of our electricity sources, and there had been sort of a gradual decrease, and that was made clear by some backcasting, what have emissions been since 2005. And then in March 2020 is between sort of January and March, we had a public climate survey out to look at how does the Bloomington public perceive climate change and the city's role in addressing it. There were about 400 respondents, and overwhelmingly people said that they were concerned, that they noted the signs of climate change locally, and that the majority supported climate action. As to what that meant to different respondents, that varied pretty significantly, but in general, it showed that in Bloomington and Monroe County, people were on average more concerned about climate change than in other areas of Indiana. And then June through August of 2020 was when a lot of the sort of meetings about with the planning group occurred to try to figure out what are the most effective strategies specific to this community to reduce Bloomington's emissions. And that's where we sort of came up with a draft report, looking at other communities, looking at emissions modeling, and some actions were deemed to be more effective than others, and I'll kind of get into who the stakeholders were for that. And then at the same time, the vulnerability assessment came out. We looked at, extreme heat and flooding. Impacts will not be evenly distributed over the community. If you're interested in digging into that, I recommend reading that. And then got more feedback between October and December of 2020, presented to stakeholders, and then later, subsequently, edits were made based on public comments as well. So we had an input forum up. There was a couple presentations to council, to different constituency groups, and then it was accepted. So that means that it's a strategic document for Bloomington. There will be continued implementation and progress tracking until 2030. It's not a static document, because I think over time we'll see that some things aren't a good fit, and that's perfectly normal in most communities. They try something out, determine whether it's effective or not, and then that's what the purpose of the progress tracking. So in terms of who was involved, it was a combination of different sort of institutional stakeholders, and then different community stakeholders, as well as targeted listening sessions for people across the community. The plan itself is broken into a couple of different sections of chapters. You can think of them as like climate mitigation and climate adaptation, so transportation and land use, energy and the built environment, waste management, water and wastewater, local food and agriculture, health and safety, green space and ecosystem health, and climate economy. Had a combination of sort of like Bloomington utilities, so different departments in the city, as well as other stakeholders that would be important to make these strategies happen. And then this is a question that I often get: why do we have two plans? What's the difference between the climate action plan and the sustainability action plan? What's the purpose of having both? How do they relate to each other? Sustainability Action Plan recognized that while it touched on climate strategies, it was not specifically a climate plan. One of the pledges in that plan at the time was that the city would complete the greenhouse gas inventories and engage citizens in climate action. So to effectively do that, we need to better understand how our emissions are produced and a strategy to move towards additional reduction. The Climate Action Plan serves as that roadmap specifically, so it's exclusively focused on emissions reduction and adaptation, with some overlap with broader sustainability efforts. So you can sort of see the Sustainability Action Plan as addressing a variety of things that may not relate to greenhouse gas emissions, but also have an important sort of sustainability, community sustainability aspect. I would say, just to go back for a second. One thing that was perhaps like not as well addressed in the Sustainability Action Plan is the role of the private sector in climate action, and so that is specifically called out in the climate economy section, and then the health and safety sort of relates more to those adaptation needs from climate action. In terms of how to navigate the plan itself, so there's goals. So for each sector, there's a goal like decrease vehicle miles traveled, and that's the climate commitment that we're making to achieve the overall reduction goal. So our goal is to achieve an additional 25% reduction goal as a community by the end of the decade and to become carbon neutral at the latest by 2050. The strategy is a general plan of how to achieve that goal or how we'll get there. And then the action is what's the specific activity that's recommended to achieve that strategy. And all these actions came out of a review of other municipalities' plans and sort of best practices for high impact actions. And then the metrics are sort of indicators of progress in a given category. And then as more data becomes available, we can be more granular in how we're tracking that. There's also areas in the plan where you look at benefits. So what are expected positive outcomes that could occur if this is implemented? There's not only just for these emissions reductions actions, climate benefits, there's also for some areas, economic benefits, health benefits, etc. If you go to a specific section, as I mentioned before, so we have got these goals, strategies, there's usually some context about each section, so contextualizing for the reader about the strategy. Here's the metric, the expected benefits, so, implement recommendations about optimization study, expected benefits, will enhance the transit system, will reduce traffic congestion, etc. And then I did want to point out this. So one thing that you can see at the end of each chapter is that it shows, okay, here's the effect of each strategy. So not every single thing that
Lauren?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Could you share your screen?
Oh, no. You should have told me before I got like 15 minutes into it.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm sorry I didn't see your hand if you had it up, Christy.
Okay. Share. Slideshow. Okay, slide. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Christy, okay, good.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'll send you the slides as well after we finish up here. Okay, so for each strategy, it shows what the emissions response would be, just as a modeling exercise. So some of them are more impactful than others. While they're all worth pursuing, we can expect a different response in terms of emissions reduction. So for instance, if we're looking at this with the arrow, accelerate on-site solar PV citywide is going to have a much larger impact than some other things that are also important but have sort of less of a emissions response. So for each section you can see that. For other things, they may have more qualitative benefits and people weigh that differently, but just from a how are we doing on reducing emissions perspective, this is sort of a helpful guide. Yeah.
Real quick, I don't think that made it into the final draft. I thought that was, or the final version. I think that graphic is from these drafts.
We can look at that in a second.
Okay.
So, and then the other question was, what is the role of this commission in supporting the climate action plan? I did want to say I see a couple of potential areas of support. The plan is accepted. I think one important thing is to increase commissioner knowledge of the plan, and this is sort of just like a brief intro. And there's an executive summary on the website, so if you don't want to go through the whole thing, to just become familiar with what the goals are generally. Full plan, and just as there's ongoing progress updates, I'll plan on bringing those to the commission so you can see how things are going. Increased coordination between the Commission on Sustainability and Council Climate Action and Resilience Committee. So as there's updates in that committee, to make sure that there's updates brought back to this, so that people are on the same page. And then as the commission works on their work plan items, including whether it's advocacy, topical working groups, events, listening session, that those are aligned with objectives of the plan. So that's sort of the end of the Climate Action Plan 101, but if you have any questions, did want to provide an opportunity for discussion.
That is very helpful. Where was this?
What's that?
Where was this?
This slideshow?
Yeah.
Given versions of this at different points,
Oh,
but
okay.
I think most of you weren't on the commission at that point, so I did want to just provide more context, because
Yeah.
as people have joined subsequently to the plan being passed, but.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How often will progress reports be given?
I think we're gonna do every 6 months. On the plan it says it needs to be every 2 years, but I think to increase communication between council and the community, do every 6 months. The last one was last October, and then we're working on scheduling this next one.
So things from the plan are being implemented now?
Mhm.
Or, okay.
How do these, where are the working groups to come up with the ideas to affect the climate action plan?
What were they?
Or how do I say this?
What was the process like?
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
so how were the ideas developed, and who's
Yeah.
responsible for acting on them outside of us?
Yeah. There's kind of two parts, but so the process was multifaceted. So I was a project manager, and then we had sort of consultant support. So the value of providing additional consultant support was that they had done a review of a lot of different municipalities' plans and aggregated those different actions into categories, and we sat down and reviewed them with the teams that were working on the strategy. So for like the transportation working group, which included, for instance, like Bloomington Transit, they were able to provide feedback of, we've tried this and it doesn't seem like it would be effective here, or this aligns with our strategic plans, because a lot of different sort of implementing departments also have, you know, master plans or work plans, and so we were trying to create alignment with existing city plans while looking at opportunities to try new things that we may have implemented before. And so it was pretty iterative. We had a high level conversation of like where are the gaps right now, what is the data telling us that we have about emissions, and then getting stakeholder feedback, including community feedback. And that started through a variety of different forums. I mean, there was different listening groups, mostly on Zoom because it was a pandemic.
When you say we, you're talking about the commission
The-
and then
the
and
planning
the departments?
team.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
So-
together you guys built business cases for these
Mhm.
proposals, and then
Yeah. And there was a lot of coordination. The mayor has a climate action team, so that's composed of every department head. So during that 9-month process, it was shared at different points with the department heads as well to get their feedback. So there was a lot of involvement by not only department heads, but other staff members that are working in these areas day to day, including from parks, utilities, etc. Especially in like some of the chapters like water and wastewater. Since we operate the utility, we have more administrative controls over that component than we might have in other categories where there's other important sort of decision makers outside of the city government. And I think what was the second part of your question?
who's executing on?
Who's
So once you
Yeah.
guys came up with the business proposals or the business cases
Mhm.
with the department heads and the subject matter experts, when did I guess you reviewed them with the mayor's office or the city council, and then
Mhm.
they approve it, and then what happens? It goes into the specific working groups.
Well, it's a community-based plan, so I think the task over the course of the entire plan's implementation will be to get commitments also outside of the organization as well. So in different communities, that's been achieved in different ways, whether it's through like employer commitment letters. I think one thing that we're working on now is trying to set up a public-private partnership with large employers to review what their climate commitments are and how they align with the plan. Their sort of responsibility is not always only to Bloomington as well. So it was a city developed process, which is pretty normal for municipalities to try to provide leadership and saying like this is a community-based problem, we're going to set a strategic plan for this. But then in terms of getting more partnerships and commitments, that's part of the ongoing task over the course of the entire remainder of the time until 2030.
So who's managing the projects specifically for each? Is it the department head that's running the projects, or
It
is it the
depends on
community?
what the action is. So if each department has different responsibilities
I was gonna
under
say,
the
if you
plan.
use the composting program as an example. How did that come to fruition?
Right now, and over the course of the last year, we've been trying to match available funding with climate action plan goals. I think now that there's more sort of long-term dedicated funding, it will be more possible to look at the entire plan and say which areas have we not been able to address moving forward. But each department has sort of different responsibilities under the plan, and that's managed through the mayor's climate action team. It's not your entire question, but I think there's like a set of city responsibilities, and then there's a set of sort of individual and institutional responsibilities, and some of those areas are further along than others.
I see. And then whenever there's a budget allocated to a certain project, then it's really to whatever resources are available to run it, whether it's going to be on the community side or the city side.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a combination of public and private investment in order to make these things happen, and it really just depends on whether the area is sort of within the administrative control of the municipality or it's the responsibility of partnership between different entities. So like, for instance, we don't control our power grid, but we can still encourage alternatives development, like through solar. So that's going to require a partnership with Duke Energy to make that particular strategy move more quickly.
And each department has its own project managers that are assigned to these? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Any other questions?
If there are further suggestions, like one thing that I severely dislike are idling vehicles. I've literally climbed in the cab of City of Bloomington and shut them off when they're on our street, just spewing constantly.
Yeah.
How could we input that, simple things like that, or neighborhood composting programs to try and push?
Like a suggestion
Yeah.
form or something? I think let me check if I still have the form up on website for feedback. If not, I don't think I do. I think we open up a feedback mechanism. There's still on the GHG emission profile like a section where we were accepting comments because it was accepted by council. I think I don't have that on the website, but it's a good idea to put that back up now that people are getting more engaged with it.
Was there ever any discussion of adopting the SDGs for the commission as a statement of scope, I guess?
I can't speak to before 2019, but it could have been a discussion. I don't think it has been since then.
Other questions? I would just like to verify, if I may, in response to David's question. Did you say there is a project manager within each department that has like climate action plan?
It depends on the size
responsibilities?
of the department, but there's either an appointee to the climate action team or a specific departmental climate action team. So if it's a larger department, they have a climate action team with multiple members. If it's a smaller department, it's the department head. So, I mean, we have a variety of different sizes of departments. There's about 800 employees for the city of Bloomington, so.
Got it, thank you.
Could you give a brief summary about the actions that are being implemented? I know there's probably a lot, but like, are we trying to increase the tree canopy? We're trying to increase green infrastructure? Like what those types of actions are?
Sure. I think, let me just pull up, answer more succinctly. So I'll just give one example from each category, and this is not sort of illustrative of the entire scope of what's happening, but in since 2019, Bloomington Transit has been allocated a series of low no emissions grants for electric buses and has purchased and procured a series of different 4 buses that will now become 10 all electric buses. They're also looking at potential fleet diversification into other low carbon emissions. We have a lot of hybrid buses, but we're moving more towards electrification, also with usage of the public safety local income tax for fleet electrification in other sort of city operations. There's a major Dillman Modernization project of the Dillman wastewater treatment plant that was $23 million. That particular wastewater treatment plant consumes 15% of all electricity in Monroe County. So because it takes so much energy to pull water from Lake Monroe. So that's been a big investment in reducing our non-renewable energy use. That includes things like adding a disc filter, new blowers. So that will be opening up, and those modernizations will be complete this summer. Other things. One of the big items was, completing this climate action planning process. We also, through some of the new programs that I run, like the solar and energy efficiency program, the lending program for residents, that has been an effort to increase financing options for people that are looking for opportunities to reduce their own emissions. We've done a couple LED conversion projects, bus stop accessibility improvements, construction of the 7 line, which is the new multimodal transportation on 7th Street. Increasing recycling education. This is a joint effort with Monroe County Solid Waste to try to reduce contamination that's increased during the pandemic. So sending a lot of letters to residents, increasing composting, both in terms of community drop-off sites for earth keepers and then the new program. There's been quite a few green infrastructure funding projects. That's about $300,000 a year or $400,000 a year in green stormwater infrastructure. And yeah, so that's just a couple of them. If you're interested in more, there's a sustainability progress report from last year as well that you can read more in detail about each of those. But I would say those are been major categories of improvements.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? All right. Thank you very much, Lauren.
Yep.
Extremely informative and really important information, I think, for the commission as well.
Yes.
And glad that was something I had desired to express as well, so I appreciate that you fielded all of that. All right, that is our first item under discussions, not resolutions. Our second is the Bcos annual report discussion. Regrettably, that is Najla's assigned responsibility in our co-chairship, but in her absence, I think we can still discuss it. I did send out an email. I'm sorry that you wouldn't have received it, but there were just a couple of reference documents in it. One was an annual report from another commission, and then the other was the strategic plan for the Bcos in 2017-2018. So essentially, the annual report, as defined by the Municipal Code 2.12.100 for the Commission on Sustainability. It's under Powers and Duties. Item D is to provide in cooperation with the city and other boards and commissions an annual sustainability assessment based on sustainability indicators. The assessment shall be included in an annual report and provided to the council, the mayor, and the public. So Lauren had specified in particular that the report should contain a concise summary of the commission's top activities from the previous year, a brief explanation of how these activities align with city goals, and then lastly, a concise summary of the commission's plans for the upcoming year. So I think the last point is going to be a particularly important one for all of us to be engaged in, rather than assigning it or delegating it to a subcommittee, since it's what we will all be collectively working on for the next year. So the intent for this agenda item was just to approach the planning of these things and making sure that everyone had the opportunity to review the documents that were distributed and get ideas about how we would like to proceed with that plan. So with that, I will open the floor to input if anyone has any immediate thoughts that they would like to express.
This is last year, so we can model off of.
So the one that you were looking at is from the Department of Economic and Sustainable Development, and then the one that I emailed out, I can actually pull up right here and share as soon as I get to it. Apologies for the delay. So this is the reference that I had from the Council for Community Accessibility. I don't have the last actual report that the Bcos produced, but essentially it contains very precisely the three things that Lauren had listed, the summary of their activities and their goals, and then how they relate to the city plans. And their goals in particular are there. So this is a process that we approached, I would say probably around this time last year, and had a little bit of contribution on commissioners' particular interests. We had used like a Google Doc, just a shared doc, to allow people to enter information, add notes. It seemed to be an effective way to be able to contribute asynchronously, so that we didn't have to necessarily sit down in the meeting for setting out our summary of our plans for the upcoming year. But I think maybe a hybridization of doing some asynchronous work as well as convening during meeting time to solidify all those plans could be helpful. Dave, did you find the email or the attachment that I provided?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd say maybe it'd be helpful for new people, obviously, to review the climate action plan, like Lauren said. And then maybe by the next meeting, we could all have brainstormed some goals that we might have, or we could even put it into a shared Google Doc like we did last time. And that might help us just all get it on together, you know, just because everybody does, you know, kind of have to get up to speed on the climate action plan on their own time, because it's a very long document. But maybe, yeah, by next meeting, we could start to have some goals, you know, that we could all add to one document, and then maybe we can talk about priorities and who wants to do what can we do, that kind of thing. Could help. And I can contribute to writing what we did last year, if we need to write that up.
I think that document should actually still exist. I can share that with current commissioners if there's a general interest in that. In fact, if you want to continue the discussion, I can check to see if it's already in. It should already be in
The one that we did last year?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking that one might be a little messy, but.
Sure, I was thinking more so as a reference for what it looked like than as a base to start the next one.
Be curious to hear from folks what you think of as the major achievements or focus areas for the commission over the last year. I think that part's always really helpful for council to hear, because we've got 30 or 40 some boards and commissions. This, you know, not all of them have ex officio members serving on the commissions, so it's really, really difficult to keep track of what everybody's doing, and just like a summary of like what your purview is, what you've been working on for the last year, what your goals are, like kind of like what you were saying, Joseph, is really, really helpful. The two that come to, like, there's been a lot of transition in commissioners over the last year, but I think the two things that jump to the top for me are like actually some process reform things to like improve how the commission functions. So we changed, you know, when leadership positions are voted on, changed quorum rules, engaged in the Robert's Rules training that you gave, Joseph, and some other things like that to help the commission function better, and then also the Just Transition Working Group and the lead up to the town hall event with the racial equity impact assessment and some of that work. There were other things too, but those are the two that first jumped to my mind. So I guess I'm curious to hear from other folks that have been on maybe a little bit longer too, like what you think of as the major takeaways from last year, the last last 12 months, I suppose, is how we should think of it.
Najal's not here, but I know she's been working on housing stuff,
Mhm.
which I think is really important, and I actually would like to help her on that more. So housing, housing issues.
Yeah, I think the initial resolution was passed probably more than 12 months ago. I think it was
Okay.
it was right about that. It was
Well, I think she
March,
was,
April, but I think there's ongoing work.
she was working
Yeah.
to do
Yeah.
another one. Yeah,
It's,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
and it's worth bringing up. Yeah.
Yeah, to my knowledge, none of that ongoing work has been brought to the commission yet,
No.
because I was unaware of it, apart from the reference at last month's meeting that it hadn't yet been provided. But yeah, to your remark, Matt, the just transition, I think, was the one thing that stood out to my mind as the one, I guess, the most tangible thing that was achieved. But I'm glad that you mentioned also the sort of infrastructural administrative components as well. Those had just kind of struck me as not necessarily outreach impact type things, but are still an important activity that did take place, and that I think is worth noting as well.
There's a lot of waste reduction outreach that was led for some apartment complexes. You didn't get through that whole spreadsheet, but just contacting apartment managers and asking if they offer recycling and composting services.
I think that also falls just outside of the 12-month window that we're looking at. But yes, I mean, that does exist. I can check the date from the last correspondence and see if that fits in the window.
I don't recall when the last annual report would have been given. Did we do a Bcos delivered report last year? Okay, so if that's not the case, I think it's perfectly appropriate to bring in things from the last year-ish.
Okay.
Uh,
It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, we were meeting remote up until, what was it? March this year? Yeah, so I mean, this is kind of like really the beginning, I feel like. And the climate action plan was kind of still in the works and everything, so I feel like now we have, things are more solidified and we have, a good group, we have an opportunity to do more, I think.
I'm not sure that any commissions gave a annual report verbally to council during COVID, and if they did, it was pretty brief. So it was like one of those things that was more or less suspended. So we've gone through a whole cycle of commissioners that haven't participated in this process. I did want to say, I think one thing that stymied progress in getting it finished was that it doesn't need to be that long. I think that the one that you showed is a great example, but if we can just get a one-page copy that everyone's collaborated on that shows what the basic activities have been and what you are expecting to do next year, that would be helpful as a point of reference.
Matt Caldy, who I think is maybe vice chair of the Environmental Commission, gave their annual report maybe a couple weeks ago, and it was a nice, kind of 5-minute update. So he came to the meeting and delivered that in person, which I thought was great. I think he had a few questions from council members, so
Okay.
I would definitely support, assuming that's okay with scheduling on the mayoral end. I think that's helpful too.
Yeah, so when you're ready, we can work on getting it scheduled.
Okay.
It doesn't, whether it's now or December or whenever. Alright, I'm also
Oh, sorry. go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I'm working with the Monroe County Environmental Commission to come up with a 6-month work plan for that commission as well. So those two things I think are related, just trying to figure out with the remaining meetings left in the year, what is the most important for you all to accomplish, and then focusing on those items. 'Cause as a volunteer commission, it can be difficult. People are spread too thin.
Yeah, I wouldn't stress it too much like that. The odds of most or all council members reading everything that lands on our plates is slim,
Sure.
So short and succinct is good, and then also you've got our attention, all 9 people, there at a meeting. That's what the in-person update is just, I think, higher value. So I wouldn't worry too much about an extensive written report.
Okay. May I ask, in what environment or part of the meeting the report was presented?
It's in the first part of the agenda of regular sessions. There's like an opportunity for committee reports, and then there's a section labeled mayoral reports, and that's when you usually hear from commissions as well.
Got it, okay.
But yeah, you just need to coordinate probably through Lauren with Stephen Lucas, the administrator, get on the agenda.
So I shared, there's a Google folder called Bloomington Commission of Sustainability. I updated those of you that weren't shared on that. That's where a lot of the documents are. If any of you are not part of that, I think I got everyone, but just let me know and I'll add you to that.
Yeah.
So I think subsequent to this meeting, if you just wanted to add a Google Doc in there and share it with everyone, they can put their ideas in asynchronously between now and the next meeting about ideas of what they like to work on for the rest of the year, and then add that to the agenda.
Excellent. I also just located that within that Bcos shared folder. There's a subfolder called Collaboration. So it's the logical place to find it. That's where the existing ideas for brainstorming file is. I'll create a 2022 version. Yes. And I do think that's a very good idea to sort of assign the familiarization with the climate action plan between this meeting and the next one, since that, as Lauren just pointed out, is really kind of one of the core, or the core responsibility of the commission is to facilitate in the implementation of that plan. So everyone can get familiar, input what they want to focus on or what they want to prioritize, and then we can refine that into what we collectively do, and then, like Alicia said, assign sort of specific goals and persons to those goals, or at least have that discussion at the next meeting.
Could you talk a little bit about how the commission facilitates implementing the corrective action plan? What do we do?
That is, I think, to be part of the discussion. And if I may say so, I think it's really sort of in our capacity to discuss how we want to do that. I know Lauren's mentioned several times in the past about the value of the commission being a connective tissue, either within different parts of the city or between the city and the community, in ways that the city can't necessarily do itself, and that we can do in our capacity as a sort of liaison between different groups in getting them familiar with and involved in the climate action plan.
In March, it was a commission action to facilitate a town hall about equity and climate implementation, and had a guest speaker from Oakland to talk about their racial equity impact assessment, and which segued into a broader community conversation. It was a hybrid event, so there's possibility if there was interest in follow-on conversations like that. There's maybe ongoing advocacy with other sort of legislative items that are happening. So just ways to think about an alignment between what your interest is as a commission, the limited amount of time that you'll have, and trying to prioritize that towards something that seems like it will be the highest impact. So I think it's really important, this commission, because you are all members of the community as well, so it creates an opportunity to be more approachable for people that are generally interested in the topic and just want to provide a way to provide feedback and input. And so there have been a couple of, I think, commission run events in the past. Other commissions also have different events as well, and so just thinking about what that might look like in the context of the rest of the year. It's been a little bit tough to get engagement with commission work over the last 2 years on Zoom. It's not in the most accessible format for some people, and so I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and the question is just, what are you guys the most, passionate about working on as well?
I'll just add that, yes, I think with advisory commissions in particular that aren't, statutorily enabled with some particular power, like that question comes up a lot of what can they do or what should they do, and it's really flexible, and I think like folks should think of commissions which sort of jointly serve and advise the mayor and the city council as a vehicle to bring things that you want to work on. So Matt, you mentioned anti-idling as an interest, and I was going to chat with you briefly afterwards just to hear more about that concern. And I know it's something that's on the radar of Public Works, and I think there's been some changes in the recent past, and probably police and fire as well. Like there's been some changes in the recent past on that front, but there's I think more yet to come that are in process. And if there's legislative examples from around the state that are possible and something you'd like to see, like that can originate from commissioners. The example I sometimes call to mind is the Parking Commission, which is a relatively new commission at the city, and a former commissioner who was the chair developed an ordinance. It was Ordinance 1811 that was like a comprehensive overhaul of city parking policy and pricing because of their research and their report, and shopped it for a sponsor among council members, brought it to council, it passed. It changed a fair amount of city code with relation to parking policy. So that was a commissioner using a advisory commission that didn't have any technical statutory authority as a vehicle to bring policy change to the city that was implemented. So I just like to highlight that example because I think there's countless ways that the climate action plan can be augmented and furthered, through sustainability actions, some of them legislative, and not that it's just easy to take that on, individually or something, but it can be a vehicle to try to do some of those things. Because even on the council, I mean, we have one or two staff, maybe three at times, serving all 9 of us. We're all part-time or have other full-time jobs and have a pretty limited ability to research and bring these things ourselves. So commissions can be another option for that. And I'm always happy to help advise and facilitate like that type of work.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. I will note that I just pulled up once again, the code related to the definition of the Commission on Sustainability. I don't know. Oh yeah, you can read it. Points A and B, I think, are probably the most relevant to directives in the definition of the Bcos and what we can do. And this is under the definition of powers and duties. So yeah, coordinating, like I said, with residents, businesses, government, non-governmental agencies, and to advise and make recommendations to the Common Council, City Administration, and boards. So there is that community outreach component, but there's also the working within the city component, kind of like Matt just mentioned. I think those are the 2 most clearly specified directives within the definition. Yep. And also, as an example, the outreach that Lauren had just referenced a moment ago was something that I undertook even before I joined the commission as just a means to try to get a better understanding of the apartment recycling issue, and just took it upon myself to catalog, with the help of Lauren and a couple of other commissioners, the list of current apartment complexes within the city of Bloomington, compiled all their contact information, and then just started reaching out to them with a small survey just to find out what their hurdles are in having recycling at their facilities, in a hope that with enough data aggregated, there could be a clear potential solution for the city to have a data-driven directive to say, this is what is preventing it from being accessible. Maybe we can act on this particular axis to alleviate that or to overcome that hurdle. So yeah, again, just sort of a creative, however you want to approach it, and then using the body collectively to make that possible.
It's great to hear examples.
And yeah, that's also a demonstration of how waste is going to be my focus, and you'll hear me talk about it in everything going forward, ever.
Mine will be extreme heat, so.
Are there any other thoughts on the planning process? Or on the CAP in general?
I'll just say, if you have any other questions in between now and next meeting about the CAP, feel free to email me. Always available. My response time may vary, depending on how difficult your question is. But yeah, especially if you're having trouble finding something or wondering if it exists. I manage the sustainability page, so most things you can find on there, but happy to email you anything else that I have that might not be publicly posted as well.
Thank you. All right, with no further, actually, Sarah, you had your hand up a moment ago.
Well, I was just thinking about climate action planning because I know IU created that committee, and I didn't know if like it was possible because I'm sure like, you know, IU being an institution located in Bloomington like contributes overall to GHGs. Did you guys take that into account when you were doing a GHG emission inventory?
Take IU?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
Part of the community.
Okay. 'Cause like I didn't know if there would be opportunities for us to work with like their committee or ERI or Sustain IU
Yeah,
in
I'm
like
not sure that they've convened yet, but
no, they haven't. They're really dragging their feet, but I didn't know if there was like maybe an opportunity to like do something with that.
yeah. I think we'll figure it out. I think definitely, I mean, ongoing working relationship with the ERI for sure, and I think that's also another opportunity as we better focus what the commission is working on to better align that with other resources. In terms of the climate committee, climate action planning committee, I guess we'll kind of see what direction that's going. But yeah, I mean, consider IU part of the community, and their action is really important.
Sarah, I might echo. It's, yeah, perhaps worth reaching out, honestly, to IU administration and offering to help support the CAP committee's work in some form or another, since they're, since the Bloomington has established climate goals that, and IU Bloomington falls within the jurisdictional boundaries of Bloomington. It could be good to collaborate.
Yeah.
To offer. Anyway.
I think that's another good example of one of the ways that you can be creative. If we collectively decide to do that, we can just reach out to them and engage. And yeah, that would be a powerful place to work.
Does anybody have President Whitten's cell phone number?
I shook her
Just
hand.
text her.
Number one.
I shook her hand at the thing on Tuesday.
Very famous though.
Yeah, essentially.
All right.
One cool thing that I learned, I went to the IU farm and found out that there was a scientist that was actually growing algae on top of the power plant for carbon sequestration. And he has about 1,000 liters twice a week of, he's already had it tested for metals, organically certified fertilizer. It's amazing stuff. The IU farm can't take it because they don't have transportation, but as an urban farm, we're starting sometime in June, we're going to start taking 25 to 50 gallons a week and using it. So that's something that someone at IU is just taking the initiative and is doing, and it's open to the public to take, but he just doesn't have enough off-takers. 1,000 liters isn't that much, 300 gallons twice a week, so it's not going to sustain large farms, but local urban farms or smaller farms it could. So maybe some sort of combining with them to market that or to make it known so that more people will off-take that free and really nice resource. Sounds like you're aware of that.
Chip Layholt, right?
Yep.
Runs that. Yeah. Yeah. You should reach out and pitch that to him. Have the commission help find do some outreach or something. Yeah, it's a cool project.
Yeah, I think that's a good example of the types of things that could go into like the brainstorming sheet, so that we can come back to these ideas that we compile and then decide on who is going to work on them and what we want to prioritize. Any further questions or comments? We have about 5 minutes remaining in our scheduled meeting time. And then the last listed item on the agenda is the Bcos executive session, which actually has nothing to discuss or report. So that doesn't actually need to be addressed, but we can go to reports from commissioners if there's anything that anyone wanted to report in the final 5 minutes.
Just make a quick comment.
Yes.
So we have to post our agenda statutorily 2 days before we meet, which for Bcos is Friday. So if I'm out of the office on Friday, which is what happened last week, I had to post it on Thursday. So I understand that the agenda might not be reflective of everything that you guys wanted to talk about. If you, in between the meetings, have things that you want to be added to the agenda, I will continue to send a call for agenda items, but feel free to send those sequentially so we can build the agenda over time, so that there's less of a rush sort of towards the end of it and that we get stuff posted in time. Because if we get too close down to the wire, then it's not posted in time for public notice, and we want to give the public an opportunity to see what is on the agenda for the meeting. So I just wanted to kind of flag that as an item, like, so, I mean, if you have new business, especially, I would say, if you are interested in having first reading of resolution, the more time that I can have to look at that, the more likely it is to be ready to be on the agenda and to be circulated to everyone in time for them to be able to review it. You're, of course, welcome to email anyone else about other items in between that come up, and we'll continue to talk about what you guys want to work on before next time, so.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I think in general, it would also be helpful to just CC myself and Najla as chairs, and I hope for a more distributed construction of the agenda through that group rather than all going directly to Lauren. So it would facilitate that process on our end if you're able to include all of us so that we could all have the information and then manage that to the best of our ability. That'd be great. Are there any other reports from commissioners? Okay, so the last item would be new business, which again, if you didn't get any agenda items added prior to it being distributed, you can always propose them during new business. So it can still be discussed even if it's not announced necessarily ahead of time. And without much time for new business or any takers, we can proceed to, well, I'll make a reminder that the next meeting is June 14th here at 6 p.m. And then if there is no objection, this meeting will adjourn. And seeing none, we are adjourned.